In 1960, two men reached the deepest point on Earth and reported something waiting for them that should not have been able to survive there. They expected rock, mud, and nothing else. Instead, they saw movement in a place scientists had calculated was too crushing for any living thing to exist. Then, for the next 52 years, nobody went back down to check. Not because the mission failed, because of what happened right after it succeeded. The day we proved it was possible. On January 23, 1960, Swiss oceanographer Jacques Piccard and U.S. Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh climbed into a steel sphere barely 6 feet across and rowed a vessel called the Trieste nearly 7 miles straight down into the Challenger Deep, the lowest point of the Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean. The descent took almost 5 hours. Pressure outside the sphere reached over 1,000 times what people feel at the surface, enough to crush most submarines instantly. Partway down, one of the outer window panes actually cracked and shook the whole vessel, though it held long enough to finish the dive. When they touched bottom at roughly 35,800 feet, they say they briefly saw a flatfish moving across the sediment, a claim later scientists have questioned since fish are not thought to survive much past 27,000 feet. Whatever they actually saw, the dive proved something nobody had ever proven before. A human being could reach the deepest scar on the planet and come back alive. Piccard and Walsh assumed this was only the beginning. Sitting on the deck afterward, they guessed the next expedition would follow within 2 or 3 years at most. Instead, something almost nobody expected happened next. The 52-year gap nobody talks about. Nobody went back, not for over 5 decades. By the end of the 1960s, the United States Navy had quietly ended its manned deep ocean program, limiting the Trieste and any future vessel to depths above 6,000 meters, well short of the trench it had already conquered. Walsh himself said in a later interview that it felt strange watching decade after decade pass with no return trip, calling it amazing that nobody had ever gone back. Filmmaker James Cameron finally became the second human being to see the Challenger Deep with his own eyes in 2012, alone, in a submarine he helped design himself called the Deep Sea Challenger. Between the Trieste dive and Cameron's solo trip, only remote unmanned vehicles like Keiko in the late 1990s and Nereus in 2009 had managed to reach that depth at all, and both were robots with no human aboard. 7 years after Cameron's dive, in 2019, explorer Victor Vescovo went even deeper in a vessel called the Limiting Factor, becoming the first person to make the trip more than once. Vescovo went on to complete dives in all 5 of the world's oceans as part of an expedition later dubbed the 5 Deeps. That 52-year silence was not a cover-up or a secret. It came down to something far more ordinary and far more limiting than most people assume. Cost, danger, and priorities that shifted somewhere else entirely. Why going back is so hard. Building something that can survive. Challenger deep pressure is closer to building a spacecraft than a submarine. Only a small handful of vessels on the entire planet, roughly 10 according to recent counts, are certified to reach true deep ocean depths at all. Compare that to space travel, where over 2,800 rockets launched in a single recent year alone. A retired U.S. Navy admiral once pointed out that the original Trieste dive received almost no public attention next to the massive publicity campaign that surrounded the first American astronauts a year later. Space exploration got national headlines, dedicated agencies, and enormous long-term funding. Deep ocean exploration got a single successful dive, and then years of budget decisions that quietly moved money elsewhere. Each certified deep submersible also cost tens of millions of dollars to build and maintain, and only a handful of countries have ever been willing to fund one at all. The danger never really went away either. In 2023, a privately built tourist submersible called Titan imploded while descending toward the wreck of the Titanic, killing all 5 people aboard almost instantly. A tragedy that reminded the world just how unforgiving deep ocean pressure still is. Even 6 decades after Trieste proved it could be survived. That funding gap and that ever-present danger did not just slow down submarine dives. It left almost the entire ocean floor completely unseen by human eyes, a fact that still holds true today. What we have actually seen of the ocean floor. Here is a number that surprises almost everyone who hears it. Researchers with the nonprofit Ocean Discovery League recently calculated that humans have visually observed less than 0.001% of the deep sea floor, an area only slightly larger than the state of Rhode Island. As of early 2026, NOAA reports that only about 28.7% of the global seafloor has even been mapped using modern high-resolution sonar, and mapping only shows shape, not what is actually living down there. More than 90% of the ocean sits below 200 meters, deep enough that sunlight cannot reach it at all. A marine biology researcher once put it simply: we understand the surface of the moon and parts of Mars better than we understand our own ocean floor, despite never having pulled a breath of oxygen or a drop of water from either place. The same research also found that most of the dives that have happened were clustered near a small handful of wealthy countries, meaning huge stretches of ocean elsewhere have barely been visited even once. Ships like NOAA's Okeanos Explorer now spend months at sea running remotely operated vehicles down into these gaps, and nearly every single expedition still turns up a species nobody has ever formally described before. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This tiny sliver of exploration has still turned up discoveries strange enough to rewrite entire science textbooks. The first of those discoveries did not come from a trench at all. It came from an ordinary research dive that stumbled onto something biology had no explanation for. The moment scientists realized life does not need the sun. In 1977, researchers exploring hydrothermal vents on the deep ocean floor made a discovery that broke a rule biology had never questioned before. Every food chain on Earth was believed to start with sunlight and plants. But clustered around scalding cracks in the seafloor, far below any trace of light, scientists found thriving colonies of microbes and animals getting their energy directly from chemical reactions in the vent water instead. One researcher later called the discovery completely revolutionary, saying it rewrote the science books overnight. This process, called chemosynthesis, meant entire ecosystems could exist in total permanent darkness, feeding off minerals and heat instead of the sun. In 2019, researchers exploring the seafloor off California and Oregon discovered an entirely new vent field they had never seen before, naming it the Apollo Vent Field to mark the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. NASA later built a research program called Subsea around studying these same vents, treating them as the closest thing on Earth to what might be living inside the hidden oceans of Jupiter's moon, Europa, or Saturn's moon, Enceladus, whose own icy surface was confirmed to be venting water vapor from below when NASA's Cassini spacecraft flew directly through one of its plumes back in 2005. If life could thrive without sunlight this whole time, right here on Earth, it raised an obvious question nobody could answer yet. What else had been living down there completely unnoticed, waiting decades for a camera or a trap to finally find it? The ocean that makes its own light. Long before anyone found rocks making oxygen in the dark, researchers already knew the deep ocean solved its lightless problem in a different way. It simply builds its own light. A detailed video survey off the California coast, reviewing over 350,000 individual sightings collected across 17 years of remotely operated vehicle dives, found that roughly 76% of animals living in the water column produce their own light through a chemical reaction called bioluminescence. NOAA puts the number even higher in the mid-depth zone, reporting that about 80% of animals living between 200 and 1,000 meters can glow. This is not just the famous anglerfish with its glowing lure dangling in front of its mouth, though that is a real and well-documented behavior. Jellyfish, worms, shrimp, and squid all do it too, using light to find mates, confuse predators, or lure prey close enough to strike. One researcher involved in the survey said she does not think most people realize just how common this ability actually is down there, since regular cameras often cannot even pick up the dim glow many of these animals produce. Knowing that most of the ocean already lights itself up in ways humans can barely detect makes the next kind of discovery feel a little less far-fetched. Because some of the strangest life down there has nothing to do with light at all, and everything to do with surviving pressure that should be lethal. The fish that should not exist at all. For decades, scientists believed fish simply could not survive past a certain depth, somewhere around 8,000 to 8,500 meters, because the pressure would break down proteins inside their cells. Then in 2014 and 2017, researchers collected a small, pale, almost see-through fish from the Mariana Trench at depths of nearly 8,000 meters, later naming it the Mariana snailfish. It turned out to be the top predator of its entire ecosystem down there, actively hunting tiny shrimp-like creatures in complete darkness under pressure that would instantly crush a human body. In 2023, an expedition filmed a related snailfish swimming even deeper at 8,336 meters, breaking the previous record and forcing scientists to push their theoretical depth limit for vertebrate life even further than they had ever assumed possible. Researchers studying the snailfish's genes later found its skeleton was thin and incompletely formed, and its skull did not fully close, unusual adaptations that seemed to help its body handle pressure that would otherwise be fatal. Before this species was found, baited camera traps had been lowered into the deepest parts of several Pacific trenches over a dozen times without a single fish ever showing up on camera. A fish living past the exact depth scientists once swore was biologically impossible says a lot about how much guessing is still built into what we think we know about the deep ocean. And snailfish were far from the strangest thing waiting to be found down there. The creature that took a century to film, the giant squid, had been washing up dead on beaches and appearing in sailor stories for centuries, inspiring legends like the Kraken, but nobody had ever filmed one alive in its natural habitat. Every attempt failed for over 100 years, largely because bright submersible lights scared the animal away before cameras could get close. In 2012, a Japanese research team led by zoologist Tsunemi Kubodera finally succeeded using a camera system called Medusa, which used red light invisible to the squid, filming a 3-meter-long specimen off Japan's Ogasawara Islands. The footage showed the squid was a fast, aggressive hunter, not the slow, drifting creature scientists had assumed for decades. 7 years later, in 2019, a NOAA-funded expedition filmed a second live giant squid, this time in the Gulf of Mexico, barely 100 miles from one of the world's largest offshore oil rigs, proving the animal was living far closer to human activity than anyone realized. A creature that big, managing to stay completely hidden from cameras for over a century, says everything about how little of the deep ocean humans have actually watched. And giant squid were far from the strangest thing waiting to be found in total darkness. The rocks making oxygen without any light at all. In 2013, researcher Andrew Sweetman was running seafloor experiments nearly 4,000 meters down in the Pacific's Clarion-Clipperton Zone, expecting oxygen levels inside his sealed test chambers to slowly drop as tiny organisms used it up. Instead, oxygen levels rose, climbing to more than 3 times normal background levels within 2 days, with no sunlight and no photosynthesis anywhere nearby to explain it. Sweetman assumed his equipment was broken and spent close to a decade recalibrating and repeating the test before finally publishing the results in 2024. The source turned out to be potato-sized, metal-rich rocks scattered across the seafloor, called polymetallic nodules, which carry a measurable electrical charge close to that of a standard battery, potentially strong enough to split seawater into oxygen without any biology involved at all. Other researchers have since questioned parts of the study, and in 2026, the journal noted some aspects were still under review, but the strange oxygen readings themselves have never been explained away. Those same nodules are now a target for deep-sea mining companies, which means the ecosystem sitting on top of them could be disturbed before scientists even finish understanding what it actually is. 10 years of double-checking a single strange reading before going public is not how a cover-up works. It is how careful science works when nobody wants to be wrong about something this unusual. What comes next? None of this points to a suppressed secret hiding beneath the waves. It points to something more ordinary and honestly more interesting. A handful of researchers with limited money and limited submarines have been chipping away at 71% of the planet's surface, one dive at a time, for over 60 years, while a single fatal accident in 2023 proved the risks never really disappeared. Every time they get down there, they tend to find something that breaks an assumption scientists had held for decades, from a fish living past its supposed biological limit, to rocks quietly making oxygen in complete darkness, to an ocean that quietly lights itself up, more often than not. The ocean floor was never truly abandoned. It was simply too big, too dangerous, and too expensive to explore quickly, which means almost everything still living down there right now remains completely unseen. If this video gave you something, subscribing takes 3 seconds, and it helps us keep making content like this.